My name is Michael Minardi. I'm an attorney in Florida. In Tampa, we practice in the cannabis and hemp space throughout the country. In addition to the law firm, I also am involved with Canna 420 Foundation, Canna Cabinets, which is a high-end cannabis cabinet company for cannabis consumers. Regulate Florida, which is a legalization campaign for 2022 for adult use, and Normal of Florida, which is NORML, National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. If you're not involved in these types of organizations, I would definitely suggest getting involved in your states, and that's my wonderful bird, Pito. Question is where we've been, where we're going, and what do we foresee in the future in this industry and current trends that are going to occur. $18 billion is approximately the amount that this industry is worth at this point, and it's going to continue to grow exponentially. We're all here because in 2018, the federal farm bill was passed, which exponentially changed the way that the agricultural community could use, process, and cultivate hemp. The 2018 Farm Bill removed marijuana, hemp derived, from the Schedule I Controlled Substance Act, and they basically made hemp, which is anything with 0.3% or less Delta 9 THC, legal throughout the country. There's currently a lot of issues going on right now with regards to Delta 8. Some of these, probably about 10 states that have banned Delta 8, and I can see that that's going to be a continued trend. The Department of Agriculture General Counsel from Kentucky last week wrote an opinion in his position that because the federal farm bill does not address Delta 8, therefore it's illegal under federal law. I disagree with that wholeheartedly, and I think that there's at some point going to be some legal challenges in those states where people are saying that the federal government and the federal hemp law supersedes what's happening with regards to Delta 8. The USDA did issue a final hemp rule. That hemp rule did fortunately change some of the current issues that they had addressed in the interim rule. Number one, negligent violation. It's basically if someone tests their hemp test hot and they didn't do it intentionally, it's a negligent violation. The final rule, number one, raised the threshold from 0.5 to 1%, which is huge in that it gives more leeway to farmers to be able to make mistakes, especially as we continue to, I want to say, experiment with this plant and the different seeds and genetics in different environments. I think that that's going to continue to change and push how this market moves forward, and seed companies as well. It did change the sample collection time from 15 days to 30 days. And it also allowed the companies to take it from greater portions of the plant and the whole plant, not just potentially the buds and other portions, to get a more accurate reading of the total THC content of that plant. We think that these are good things that are continue to progress the industry, and hopefully with the increased percentage of negligence, we'll be able to have more people getting into it, even though there's a lot as well, with less worry as to losing a whole crop because it tests hot. They also allowed for different remediation procedures so that if you do test hot, there's different things that you may be able to do as opposed to just throwing the whole crop out. The biggest issue that I think everyone's dealing with right now is the FDACS, Food and Drug Administration, and their hemp in products, edibles, and oils, and anything that the FDA controls. The 2018 Farm Bill did give the authority to the FDA to act and to create rules and regulations under the Farm Bill for these products. They have not done so, despite the fact that many people are encouraging to do so, and even federal legislation has been passed in order to kind of push them to do so. In some ways, my position on this is that The FDA was given the authority to act, and until they do so, there should be no rules and regulations. They should not be able to sort of say, hey, we're going to create these, even though we haven't put forth rules and regulations, we're going to say you can't do this. In the way that it is in our way that our government works, is that basically the legislature or the people give authority to those agencies in order to act. And I think that they should have to act before they can start fining and really stopping people from selling these products. This has been going on for a while. The FDA has been sending letters to CBD companies for a long time now, every year probably since 2016 or 2017, since this came out. And the majority of those issues are around the claims that people are making. And we are doing another panel on labeling, because these are really important. And the one thing that I really wish that the USDA final rule would cover is labeling. I'm really disappointed that they did not do that. We represent hemp companies and manufacturers in Florida, and they want to distribute throughout the whole country, but every state has their own labeling requirements, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. I think they should have created some sort of standard just to make it a little bit more easier for people to ship across state lines, which is exactly the point of our federal hemp legislation. So these letters were warning. At that point, it was Stanley Brothers, and everyone knows Stanley Brothers started with Charlotte's Web. They were the ones on CNN that kind of really popped this industry off because they were claiming that they were dietary supplements. And at that point, it's really the only avenue that everyone was pushing in order to do so. They were required to correct the violations and kind of come into this gray area and not consider it a dietary supplement because it wasn't approved. They have continued to push letters out. There's been some sent out this year. There's been 4 sent out this year. In 2020, they sent out a lot more. And again, these are mostly issues that center around company websites, social media posts, marketing materials. And this includes, people coming up on your website, or if you're posting reviews of people who said the product is great, it helped me with my pain, it helped me with my nausea. That as well can be considered a medical claim by your company. So the FDA is sending warning letters. The other people that are getting involved in this now is the Federal Trade Commission. And they are starting to actually put some teeth into these rules and regulations. And this Federal Trade Commission issue is totally different. And this is more, again, they've sent 4 warning letters as far as I know so far this year, the FDA, in regards to, again, those medical claims as to what these products do. Also, internationally, the World Health Organization has been requested and recommended to be able to remove CBD and cannabis products from the International Drug Convention. This would allow us to be able to it's been a black cloud over the cannabis industry in this country for a while, and it's not really talked about much, but technically the things that we're doing, the legalization of it, all violates international treaties. And it hasn't been anything that's been really, pushed, and is really nothing that they could do, but they could potentially do sanctions and find us in violation of it. But luckily, nothing is happening with that, and the World Health Organization is continuing to move towards it. If you're working internationally, we are actually behind in the CBD and hemp industry in a lot of ways. I'm sure we'll be in the front in the beginning, but cultivation of these products has been going on throughout the world for years before we have. We have a current issue right now with the Germany shipment, which I think is very interesting. So they have a 0.2 threshold on Delta 9 THC, but the way that they calculate it is actually going out to 0.234, 0.23. So they're going to the 100th point as opposed to just that 0.2 point. And I haven't seen many states do that at this point in time. But I think if you're shipping internationally as well and you're getting into that market, you should really look, because all those countries over there have slightly different rules and regulations as well. And they had a $500,000 shipment that ended up stopped and prevented going through. They didn't end up prosecuting the people that were receiving it because it was that 0.23, 0.24. But obviously in the US, what I would consider anything under that 0.3 threshold, or in this position, their law is a 0.2. Their law only says that 10th decimal. But when they're looking at it, when they tested it, it goes out to the 100th and the 1000th for, a violation. So the FDA has been sued in a couple of different ways in regards to pushing their promotion and their enactment of rules. The FTC, Federal Trade Commission, has been going after a lot of people. They had Operation CBD Deceit. It was one of the first crackdowns on CBD deceptive claim companies that they've had, that they did nationwide, and it was actual operation. And the main issues in those are centered around the products. I think that these issues are testing issues. These issues are what is in your product and making sure your label requirements are correct. I was talking to a gentleman here the other day, and one of the issues we have, and we got contacted by somebody about a product that they used, and she ended up getting sanctioned for her job because she tested positive, but it was advertised as non-detectable THC. And talking to a gentleman yesterday, and my question becomes, all these 0% THC products, what is actually in those products? Do we know, is it 0% THC? And if there's any chemists or people in the audience, what I usually see is that when I get lab results, it'll say like an LOQ, like it's not sufficient, not enough quantity for us to test or calculate. To me, when you get down to that does not mean that there's no THC in it. And so I think that we're going to have, these issues are going to potentially come, and this is something else that may end up being one of these FTC type of lawsuits that is a false claim or false advertising that people are making, that it's non-detectable. So someone comes in and they're getting a non-detectable 0% THC isolate product, and they end up testing positive, that goes back to the manufacturer and the advertiser and what they're putting on that label. As to who's going to be liable for that. So I think that's going to be a big issue that's going to potentially arise. And the only way I can see it, I've spoken to some chemists about it, as the issue is that just because you can't detect it in a test doesn't mean it's not there. Doesn't mean trace amounts don't exist. And there are studies from in the past where even the cold pressed seeds, the thing that's been legal forever here in this country, had resulted in positive tests. Because no matter what, I think you're extracting it, there's still trace amounts of the THC in these products that people using it over time, and we're promoting these, and I believe that they should be used as a daily wellness supplement. So that builds up in your system over time. So the other problems in these FTC Trade Commission issues are actually what you're saying is in it. There's 250 milligrams of THC label on your bottle, and you have CBD, and you have 150 milligrams. There's been over 20 lawsuits now filed in Florida, in other states, in regards to California, Florida, Illinois, and Massachusetts regarding these false claims under this Federal Trade Commission and false advertising type issues. And again, I expect there to be more of it as this becomes more widely used and more widely, expanded, and it's acceptable to everybody. Your mothers, your grandmothers, everybody's using it. We've had at least 3 cases that I know of in Florida. We had another law enforcement Department of Corrections officer, same thing. He got a non-detectable 0 THC. He was suspended without pay during the time where he had to go through the grievance procedure of it. And I really foresee that we do employment issues around medical marijuana in Florida, but I really do foresee that this hemp issue is going to make that really avenue explode as far as lawsuits, number one against manufacturers for the non-detectable, and also against employers for firing someone who is using a legally compliant, federally legal, over-the-counter product. And it is happening, pretty regularly now. And again, I consider that to be something that's going to rise regularly. These FTC claims continue to happen. Currently, we continue to have protections. The Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment, that's usually medical marijuana. That protects anybody who's in that space, who's legally acting within that space, is legally allowed to bank in that industry in those states. They're not subject to any sort of federal monies being used to prevent them from operating their businesses. There is currently legislation going through right now. The MORE Act, which is the Marijuana Opportunity Investment and Expungement Act, is something that passed the House of Representatives that we're hoping a vote will be happening sooner rather than later in the Senate. It passed for the first time in the U.S. House Judiciary Committee, and it is really something that will federally change this, the marijuana market in the country right now. It wouldn't affect states that are not legal. It would be basically a state's rights. It would put a tax on it. It would put money back into communities and disadvantaged communities as a result of cannabis over time, so that they can get into the industry and, strive off it and make the money that millions that so many other companies are making. The other thing that is going on right now is the Safe Banking Act that recently passed. That is something that is a game changer, I think, for a lot of people. We have a good friend in Florida who works for one of the medical marijuana treatment centers, and she was denied a loan because she was associated with a business. This Safe Banking Act would sort of take away that issue, so that banks, number one, aren't looking at businesses and not taking businesses' accounts because they're involved in the cannabis industry. Some CBD companies are still having it. More banks are coming on board right now. Number two, hold it against a person as an account holder because they're involved in a CBD company, and not allow them to take any sort of action against the people for being involved in this industry, which I think is going to be a change. And I think it's really the potential path to also allow funding. So cannabis companies to actually get loans from banks and to get money from this. I think that opens up that portal and makes that avenue a little bit easier, and makes banks a little bit more comfortable in doing so, because they're no longer worried about money laundering and getting, basically their whole bank and billions taken away. We do have a promise from Chuck Schumacher, who is our Senate Majority Leader right now, to create a comprehensive legalization bill in the state, and we're hoping that's going to go through. We haven't seen it yet, but he continues to say that it's going to be launched shortly. The most important thing that I think really that's happening, and there's two things that I didn't address in this. Number one is the Delta 8 issue. That to me is one of the most important and one of the quickest changing issues right now in the country. From my research, there's about 10 states that have banned it. The Kentucky Department of Agricultural General Counsel just came out with an opinion which states that basically he believes Delta 8 is federally illegal. He says that basically that the federal farm bill only addresses Delta 9. All other THCs are still illegal under the federal farm bill. I think that there's a lot of issues with that. Personally, I believe anything that is derived from hemp at this point in time is federally legal, as long as it has 0.3% or less Delta 9 THC in it. And it potentially depends on how you are converting your Delta 8. So there is potentially a synthetic process that if you're using could be considered a precursor or a sort of like a part of the Delta 9. So it's part of the Analog Act, which would include it in it, which would then say it's a synthetic chemical process, then it is outside of that and it's done something differently than the natural plant and could be included in the analog process. The clients that I've spoken to who do Delta 8 conversion say that they're using a natural process. so that it's not actually using a chemical transition to convert it, so it wouldn't be considered a synthetic process, so that it would be considered a natural occurring compound that they're deriving from the plant in a natural manner. I really think that at some point, someone is going to get arrested and is going to sue and say that as long as it's derived from a hemp plant, it is removed from the Controlled Substance Act. They removed hemp from not only the Controlled Substance Act federally, but also hemp derived products from the definition of tetrahydrocannabinol as well, under a separate aspect of the Controlled Substance Act. So I do think that these are going to be legitimate lawsuits. They, the not FDACS, the Kentucky Department of Agriculture even sort of seemed to warn the growers and the extractors of this issue as well. So I do think, and especially with the fact that there's no federal law really governing this right now, I do foresee, and especially if you're in this, and this is something we deal with, sending to it, what I recommend in my opinion letter to clients is, listen, I feel it's federally legal, but you have to either get counsel or have us do an analysis on each state so that if you're going to send into that state, it's legal. Or you, with your contract with your distributor or whoever it is that you're sending it to, if you're specific business to business, or you have a middleman, that they specifically have in the contract that the onus is on the local party to make sure that they're compliant with their state laws. What we've seen, go ahead. So a chemical additive or some sort of chemical that sort of converts it, that takes it out of that, could be considered it. Now, heat, light, things like that are natural would not. Correct. And again, I don't know if I would think that either the USDA or someone at some point would come out with this. My perspective, if you've seen the hemp industry evolve, and we've been involved, we have a current lawsuit in Florida. We had a guy November, December of 2018 in Florida. He was arrested for selling hemp flower. And at that point, their position was it wasn't legal. They gave him back all of his, gummies and the tinctures and the oil, but they're like, the flower isn't legal. And we've seen this with the DEA. So there was a lot of fighting between Senator McConnell and Blumenauer and the DEA on this issue, because forever the DEA was like, pushing back and saying these products aren't legal. They were stopping shipments. We were part of a lawsuit, and we weren't the lead on it. Courtney Moran was one of the lead attorneys on it, great attorney in the hemp space out of Oregon, for USPS and shipping hemp products, because they were seizing packages. And we're like, well, how can we not send a legally compliant product through the mails? And so we ended up winning that case and them finding that it was excluded. But we used letters like, Senator McConnell has written letters to the DEA. They've spoken about it on the House floor, saying our intent was to legalize all parts of the plant, not just the oils, not just this. And the DEA took a very strict definition of it. And I think they're continuing to try to do the same thing with Delta 8, with everything else that they did. Really, this all Delta 8 issue started, I want to say, early this year or late last year when the DEA issued that rule. And that's where the analog comes into effect. That's where that synthetic, compound or exchange change was really first brought to everyone's attention. So I think it's going to be something that you have to monitor, considering it is the hottest really aspect of, I think, the CBD space right now that's growing as fast as possible. The other thing that I didn't mention that's not in here that's recent, that went into effect March 30th, is the new shipment requirements for the vape pens and any sort of electronic cigarette. It's under the Goodman Act. They added that. That was more centered around electronic cigarettes. But when they went and revisited it, they included electronic cigarettes, but not only nicotine, but any other substance. So there's now, at least for manufacturers of the vape pens, people are selling and shipping them across lines. There are different manifestos and requirements that you have to go through now that went into effect March 30th to ship those. And the United Postal Service is supposed to be coming out with additional sort of guidelines on shipping through their process. I think that's about it. Does anyone